F1 testing has finished with Mercedes' George Russell quickest on the final day and Carlos Sainz fastest for Williams overall. But what's the real picture? Forget the headline lap times. Across 3 days in Bahrain, we spent hours trackside, analysed hundreds of laps and spoke to all the teams and drivers. And this is what we learned. Red Bull is struggling. There are a few reasons why Red Bull seems on the back foot after testing, despite a decent looking late Max Verstappen flyer to go second fastest on the final day. Red Bull was already playing catch up after a water leak slightly limited Liam Lawson's full day in the car on Thursday. Early on Friday, there were whispers that a 2024 trait of understeer leading to exit oversteer was still apparent, but Red Bull was nowhere near ready to put together a race run as Verstappen tried a variety of setups, wing and floor combinations, losing a lot of track time in the process. In a 2-hour trip trackside at the end of the day, we noticed 3 separate runs in which Verstappen appeared with flow vis on a side pod, twice on the right hand side, once on the left, and in different parts of the side pod each time. It suggested that right up until almost the final moments of testing, Red Bull was still running tests in search of something. You might argue that's exactly what teams were here to do. Test, and Red Bull was experimenting a lot this week to understand how much it's been able to broaden its car's working window, which was the main target with the RB21. But flow vis in the final hour is a rare sight and not normally a sign of a team that has it all together. And technical director Pierre Vache admitted it was not as smooth a test as we expected. Eventually, near the end of the day, Verstappen found a combination which worked, so this can be a quick car. But it doesn't look easy quick, and Vache even hinted that the step made was not as big as Red Bull expected. If the field is as tight at the front as it looks, that could mean the difference between second and fourth in that lead group. The real pace setter. The final day in Bahrain was a little more normal, with warmer conditions which changed how the tyres worked and made the cars a bit slower, but the competitive picture remained quite clear. The long runs suggested the McLaren's small but significant advantage remained, this time with Oscar Piastri driving instead of Lando Norris. Piastri delivered the best race simulation of the final day, averaging around half a second faster than George Russell's Mercedes in their first stint. They were much more closely matched in their second and third stints, but that was with Piastri on the slower C1 tyre versus Russell's C2 in the second stint. Piastri was also set to go quickest on the final day, but suffered a moment at the final turn which ruined the lap. Some in the paddock are very worried about the speed of the McLaren, which has also attracted attention for the movement of its rear wing, but more on that later in this video. If there is a potential weakness, it's the rear instability that was well documented on day 2, but McLaren is still clearly the early favourite. Mercedes versus Ferrari. Though neither turned heads the way McLaren did, Mercedes and Ferrari looked closely matched regardless of the time of day or who was driving. Their similar lap times are being delivered in very different ways. The Ferrari quicker on the straights and with better exits off the turns, the Mercedes with better speed into the corners. Here's Scott Mitchell-Malm to explain how the two teams looked from trackside.
Could it be Mercedes versus Ferrari in F1 2025, but only for best of the rest? I don't think that's an impossibility. Based on testing so far, McLaren has definitely given off a consistent, got the fastest car vibe. It's just not always the most sorted, and Red Bull just seems like it's got a lot of catching up to do. You're going to be, I'm sure, learning about that in a lot more detail elsewhere in this video. Right now, Mercedes versus Ferrari, they're almost inseparable on track. When you watch them trackside, they're doing a lot of the same things. They look perfectly decent. They don't quite catch the eye in the way the McLaren does, but they don't look quite as awkward as the Red Bull has at times, or the midfield cars. They have got slightly different weaknesses, it seems, though. The Ferrari, when the front gives up, it seems to translate into a little bit of understeer. The front gets a bit weak, it's hard to get the nose in. The Mercedes looks very easy to lock up. Not sure if that's because it's particularly stiff across the front axle or what the cause might be, but George Russell and Kimi Antonelli, I saw them lock up more than any other driver combination over the course of this week. So it feels like Ferrari and Mercedes are in a decent position. There are asterisks against both of them, especially Mercedes, given how cool it's been, and we know that team has historically thrived in cooler conditions. Last year it could dominate even with a slightly sketchy car at times, but it's been an encouraging test for both of them. Probably trailing McLaren, but maybe not by much, and maybe in better shape than Red Bull.
The main unknown in this particular comparison is that unfortunately Lewis Hamilton's race simulation in the Ferrari was interrupted and ultimately curtailed for an undisclosed technical reason. But he appears much more at ease with the car than with the Mercedes he's driven for the last couple of years, matching Russell's pace in the afternoon just as surely as Charles Leclerc had matched Kimi Antonelli's in the morning. The worst car. Extremes are always easiest to spot in testing, which means who looks best and who looks worst tend to be the first things we get a clear idea of. And unfortunately for 2024's main backmarker, there's a sense of déjà vu this week, as Ed Straw explains.
One team has to be at the back, and based on pre-season testing, this year it's Sauber. Now, it doesn't look as terrible as the Alpine did last year, but it still looks pretty bad. Certainly the trickiest car to drive. Looked appalling initially. They did make setup changes on the first day that improved matters significantly, but still to the point where it was the car you least wanted to be in based on watching it trackside. It's not particularly quick either, so concerns there. The car's running very stiff. Now, I know this generation of F1 cars have to run stiff, but even by those standards, it's stiff, and that suggests to me maybe a car with quite a narrow window. The drivers certainly will be saying they want it more compliant, but evidently they can't put it there for whatever reason. Now, whether that can be unlocked by Australia is another question. Certainly lots of work to be done there. I put my observations to Nico Hülkenberg a few minutes ago in his media session. He was, let's say, professionally evasive, tried to joke it off, laugh it off, but he didn't say anything to disabuse me of those notions, let's put it that way. And I think pretty much what I saw on the outside was what he was feeling in the car, only obviously right in the middle of it, he'll have felt it more intently. So a lot of work to be done for Sauber, and if there were a qualifying session here tomorrow, I would be betting on the green cars to be going out in Q1.
Did you know you can get 90% off a membership with us if you take out our pre-season special offer on Patreon? It's a great time to check out the Race Members Club, including bonus podcasts and videos, exclusive behind-the-scenes insights, the chance to ask questions for our shows, community groups where you can chat with us and like-minded fans, and you get all of our regular podcasts and YouTube videos ad-free. So, if you want to become the ultimate insider for the start of F1 2025, head to Patreon via the link we've posted below to claim this limited time offer. The most improved car. The Williams isn't really the fastest car after testing, even though Carlos Sainz's day 2 time puts it at the head of the classification. But it is the most improved and probably the standout of the expected midfield group. This car has caught the eye on all 3 days, quick and responsive, even though it has occasionally tried to catch Sainz and Alex Albon out. It's a car that fundamentally is working well, even if its peak came when it was particularly light or using a more powerful engine mode, or, as with Albon going 3rd fastest on day 3, using a softer compound tyre than the others. The FW47 is perhaps around half a second off the ultimate pace, and that's good enough to put it in direct head-to-head competition with Alpine, which has also looked consistently good all week. These two teams appear to have lifted themselves clear of the rest of the midfield. Aston Martin hasn't done enough. When Adrian Newey starts at his new team next week, he might kick things off by digesting some worrying data from this test. Aston Martin has a lot to prove this year and has supposedly changed a lot on its car in a bid to solve the problems that caused it to slump last season. Though it finished 5th in the 2024 Constructors' Championship, a perfectly respectable result, its performance trajectory was poor for the 2nd year running. By the end, it had only the 8th or 9th fastest car, and sometimes it was outright slowest. It's very concerning then that Fernando Alonso indicated Aston Martin is where it was in Abu Dhabi at the end of last season. As a reminder, that was behind several midfield teams and struggling to score points. Aston Martin wanted to make this car more benign and give the drivers confidence, and while it looked like that's been achieved to a degree, the car still fundamentally lacks pace. Making the car better to drive is ultimately no good if it's not fast enough, and there were suggestions in the paddock that Alonso is not pleased. And if he's saying what he said to us, imagine what he's saying behind the scenes. Mini-DRS war revived. F1 already looks to be heading for yet another technical controversy before the first race of 2025, as Mini-DRS chatter returned to the paddock on the final day of testing. Here's John Noble to explain the full story.
Testing is over, the Formula 1 season is now just a few weeks away, and we've already got our first little tech row bubbling away in the paddock. It involves flexi wings, a topic we well knew from last year. Last year we had the issue over flexi wings at the front. flexi wings at the back and Mini-DRS, and it's Mini-DRS that's come back. There's been some nice, interesting onboard footage this weekend of the tests, and it's showing some of the wings rotating back a little bit. We see the Mercedes has been popping up, but of more intrigue has been what McLaren and potentially Ferrari are also doing in what's known as Mini-DRS. This is flexing the main plane a little bit on the straights to open up the slot gap, reduces drag, improves top speed. McLaren last season had Mini-DRS. It helped Oscar Piastri win the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Rivals complained to the FIA, and after a bit of discussion, McLaren agreed to make changes and get rid of it for the season. Over the winter, the FIA came out, changed the regulations to try to clamp down on Mini-DRS, stop these antics, but teams know where gains come from, and it appears that there may be some kind of new concepts aimed to try to get a few of those benefits coming through. It's not a big problem yet. Cars have not yet gone into scrutineering. There's no question of any kind of early protests or anything like that, but teams will be keeping a close eye on it. As we go to Australia, they'll want to see if anything's changed. If again they see this same characteristic, then there could be chats with the FIA, but this is something we'll only find out in Melbourne.
Stitch up for the real rookies. There's a big crop of rookies on the grid this season, but maybe only 2 real ones, as they've been inadvertently stitched up by F1's rules. Limited testing is often criticised. Carlos Sainz actually revealed a surprisingly impassioned complaint about that this week, saying he can't imagine what it's like to have to make your F1 debut when pre-season involves just 3 days of driving shared between 2 drivers. Ollie Behrman's at least raced in 3 Grand Prix already, and Jack Doohan made his F1 debut in Abu Dhabi. Both have also done extensive testing in older cars in the past, and Kimi Antonelli's racked up thousands of miles with Mercedes' private testing programme too. But Gabriel Bortoleto and Isaac Hadjar are in a completely different position and have huge learning curves, much bigger than the grid's other 3 rookies. They hadn't done much testing at all last year. Then new limitation on race drivers testing older cars kicked in for 2025. It meant Sauber and Racing Bulls opted to give their rookies only 1 day in 2023 cars before testing, saving some mileage for later on just in case. Both sounded quite happy with their progress in the circumstances, but it could be a baptism of fire, given Bortoleto's probably driving the slowest car on the grid and Hadjar looked occasionally quick but erratic. Weird problems for Haas. Haas mainly concentrated on long-run form rather than performance running at this test, but there is one specific thing the team needs to get sorted before Melbourne. A strange bodywork problem has now struck it twice. At the team's Silverstone shakedown, Esteban Ocon was spotted returning to the pits with some missing side pod bodywork, while Ollie Behrman had the same thing happen to him on Friday in Bahrain, as bits again flew off. Team boss Ao Komatsu didn't reveal what the cause of the issue was, only saying that a modification had been made from last year that was clearly too aggressive. But he says it will not be a problem to sort, which implies Haas may have tried to save weight around the bodywork or the fasteners and just needs to beef this up for the season opener. Speaking of weird problems, Behrman inadvertently caused one of 3 odd red flags at this test when his car flicked up a stone that smashed a window from the trackside gantry. That caused the Friday morning session to be halted, while shattered glass that fell onto the circuit was cleaned up. Another bizarre stoppage came just 7 minutes into the afternoon session, when one of the small buses transporting personnel around the circuit access roads accidentally ended up in the runoff area between turns 9 and 10 after taking a wrong turn. These, plus a circuit-wide power cut on day 1, were the only unplanned interruptions of an otherwise straightforward week, one that's ended with a reasonably consistent indication of the early 2025 pecking order.